So yeah, I think we've got a great talk planned for you all tonight. It's about some subjects that I'm really excited about. You know, as Greg mentioned, I'm the director of the California Homeless Youth Project, and so in educating policymakers, largely what we do is try to just read, write, and talk about this issue of youth homelessness as much as possible, and really cater it to people who may be busy readers, are not necessarily experts in the subject, or to make sure that it does still have the depth and nuance it needs for people that are working in this field of youth homelessness. So today I'm going to focus really on one subset of the homeless youth population, homeless college students. I'm going to talk about one issue that homeless youth are facing in California, that's the criminalization of homelessness. And then I'm going to talk about one emerging solution, host homes. And so, like I said, there are many subsets of homeless youth. There are many issues that they face, and there are many, many solutions. But tonight, I'm going to be really focused on those three. So while I talk about those, I want this to be as conversational as possible. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. I'm happy to have discussion, stop for clarification, or hear your ideas, because I'm sure that there are many knowledgeable and interested folks in the room on these subjects as well. I also just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge some partners in the room, the California Coalition for Youth, if y'all want to raise your hands. Yeah, they do state-level advocacy on youth homelessness and are great partners to us in this work. So just about 6 months ago, the California Homeless Youth Project received a 3-year grant to improve access to higher education for young people experiencing homelessness in California. And so we're partnering with the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, I know it's a mouthful, but to create a statewide higher education network. So basically we want to bring together folks from UCs, CSUs, community college, runaway and homeless youth service providers, state and national advocates, and homeless youth themselves to talk about what are the barriers that young people experiencing homelessness in college are facing to getting into college and successfully completing it. How can we help to alleviate those barriers by promoting solutions and best practices here in the state of California and learning from the good work that people are doing across the state and in other parts of the country? And then also uplifting the voices of young people who are currently homeless and getting their ideas, because we know that they are the experts and that they are navigating the gaps in the system every day. So we really trust them as experts and have already kind of brought them into the process. And you'll hear about some of the work that we're doing right now with that. So, you know, while we don't have a great idea of the scope of homelessness among young people in our country, I'm going to talk just briefly about a little bit of what we do know. So in the state of California, almost 300,000 students experienced homelessness at some point in the 2013-14 school year. That's in like pre-K through 12. And so that is the highest number of any state in the country. It is a rate more than double that of the national average. So about 5% of our student body in California experienced homelessness in 2013-14. That number, 300,000, that's more than the entire student population of Vermont, Washington, D.C., and Alaska combined. We have that many homeless students in our state. So there's been, you know, some legislative interest in that community in recent years, but we know that we need to do more, and we know that we really need a coordinated effort to make sure that we're responding to the unique needs of homeless students in California, and recognizing that they are distinct from other student communities and have needs that go above and beyond. So we don't have a great idea of how many homeless college students there are, but we're hearing anecdotally a lot more about housing insecurity and food insecurity on college campuses. Recently, some research that just came out of CSU Long Beach looked at homelessness within the CSU system, found that about 12% of college students identified that they were having a homeless experience in college. And about 24% identified they were food insecure. And that really matches some of the national statistics that we've seen for community colleges, 12 to 13% experiencing some type of homelessness. So they could be staying in their cars, they could be couch surfing or living doubled up in temporary situations where they're not on the lease, they don't know how long they could stay, they could be kicked out at any time. They're in overcrowded situations. I know just last week there was a talk on college affordability at the Capitol, and one student from UC Santa Barbara talked about living 4 and 5 students to a room, and also that she saw students sleeping in the laundry rooms in apartment complexes because of the housing and affordability in that area, and also low vacancy rates. And so this is not a position that we want students to be in. So, from the existing research out there, we've learned that the biggest barrier to college completion for most students is affordability. And many of you have probably seen, right, tuition costs have gone up tremendously, certainly even since I graduated from college in 2010. But that tuition costs are just one small piece of the puzzle. And in some ways, they can be sort of the smallest piece of the puzzle because all of the associated living costs and expenses with going to college are actually really great. So we're looking at housing, transportation, food, books, computer, phone, technology needed to be successful. And a lot of young people cannot afford all those associated costs, even if they are eligible for tuition fee waivers and things like that. So we're a part of the Californians for College Affordability. It's a collection of organizations that are kind of talking a lot about low-income students and homeless students and what their needs are. And one of the things that this coalition has said is that there's a need to have more need-based financial aid, increase the number of Cal Grants, and also the sheer amount of how many are being issued every year, and then also the size of the grant itself. So that should be increased because it has not kept pace with inflation. It's really just a fraction of what it used to be. So a lot of advocates are kind of talking about that as one policy option to alleviate the financial strain, because we know when homeless college students cannot pay, or low-income students cannot pay for all of the costs associated with college, they do some wild things. We know this from the research, and it's not because they're dumb, it's because they don't have the support needed to be successful in college. So they are taking out payday loans. You guys know about that? Yeah. Overutilizing credit cards, making the decision, having to be forced with the decision of, do I buy books this week, or do I buy food this week? And then dropping classes or dropping out of school altogether. And that's not what we want to see for California. We know that, as the workforce has shifted, there is such a great need to have more of our workforce to be educated, and that we're at a shortfall, both as a state and as a country. So that's hugely problematic. So some of the things, sort of where we're at within the phase of our current grant to improve success for homeless college students is really creating some original research and also the relationships needed to be successful in this work. So recently we partnered with the California Department of Education to interview or survey over 160 homeless education liaisons. These are the people in school districts that are working with homeless students. And we asked them a couple of questions. The first one was, what are the biggest barriers that you're seeing in linking your homeless students to college? So that 300,000 student population, we want to make sure that they're able to go on to college, that their homelessness is not something that keeps them from being able to, achieve success. So in barriers to college for homeless students, does anybody have any guesses about what we heard? What are some of the barriers to college for homeless students, do you think? Yeah, so there's a mail-based system, and you don't have a permanent address or a stable address. It might be hard to get communication with the school. Absolutely, that's a great point. Other thoughts? Yeah.
You need to look good and be clean for an interview.
Look good and be clean for an interview. So that could be a barrier to for school or for employment or for housing or for anything, right? If you're not able to take care of your hygiene needs, you might be discriminated against. There's a lot of stigma, for sure. Yeah. Transportation, even to get to school or to get, yeah, financial aid office. A hand back there?
I feel like maybe you need to just get a job, and that you don't really, this isn't the time to continue your education, but just instead you should just get a job so you can get out of your situation.
So there might be pressure to drop out of school because they know they're low income, they might need to work, and even though they may not be able to get a job that's going to have any trajectory that's going to allow them to be lifted out of poverty, they may still make that choice because they need some immediate resources. Yeah, Kim.
Completing a FAFSA and qualifying as an independent student.
Yeah, qualifying as an independent student, which, yeah, if you're a homeless student and you fill out the FAFSA, you actually don't need to have your parents' information. You are an independent student, and that can be really great for homeless youth who are not, with their family, with their caregivers. It can make it a little bit easier to fill out that FAFSA. But a lot of homeless students don't know that. They don't necessarily consider themselves homeless, and they don't know that there are particular rights in regards to financial aid available. Yeah, great point.
And that's actually the information about applying to college is the FAFSA requires having a computer and having a little bit of information about how to apply to FAFSA, trying to put it here. Even somebody who has a computer and is educated, it's difficult, to have access and figure out the systems to get into college.
Right, yeah, it's hard for any student just to navigate that whole process. And if you don't have access to a computer or the internet, it's going to be even harder. Yeah, great point. Yeah.
It must be very difficult to study when you are homeless. The library is not always available.
Yeah, so do you even have like a safe place to study or to do your homework? Like if you don't have a desk or a room, yeah, if you have to spend, a couple bucks to buy a coffee to be at Starbucks to use the Wi-Fi and you don't really have those type of resources, it might be difficult. Yeah. Great points. So the top two answers that we heard in terms of connecting homeless students to college, the top two barriers were the students' lack of knowledge of the services available, number one, and then two, difficulty navigating financial aid. So that, yeah, they didn't really know, how do I go about this process? Who do I even talk to? And yeah, how do I sort of qualify? And so we see that's a huge issue for homeless students, because even though there is a box that you can check identifying that you're homeless, you need to verify that status. You need to get a determination that also speaks to the fact that you're homeless. And that can be kind of hard for students to prove, right? Like, you don't always have documentation. You may have just bounced on your last couch, or you may have just left your parents' house because you were kicked out, something like this. And that doesn't come with like a letter. That's like a personal experience. You have a personal narrative. And so sometimes what happens is that if you're still like in high school, your homeless education liaison can write a letter saying, yes, this student has been identified as homeless, or somebody in the financial aid office can also create that determination. And a lot of people in the financial aid office don't know that they are empowered with that ability to verify homelessness status, and tend to be overly restrictive. So sometimes they disqualify people who are actually homeless. And one of my colleagues sort of likes to joke that sometimes folks in the financial aid office, act like their last name is Pell. They're like really erring on the side of exclusion because there's fear of auditing and things like that. And so I think that one of the things that we can do, hopefully in the statewide higher ed network, is to educate financial aid administrators about their rights and their responsibilities to make that determination for homeless students so they can get the financial aid they need to be successful and not feel scared about being audited, because it's actually well within their rights. Just not everybody receives specific training on that. So some of that sort of speaks to the need to have somebody designated on a college campus who is knowledgeable about homeless students and can help to make sure that they can navigate that process, navigate financial aid, and get connected to supportive services within the school.
And also have somebody that advocates for them on the high school level as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And in high school, or in sort of K through 12, there is a homeless education liaison, so somebody that is kind of designated to be like an advocate for homeless students. But with the numbers of homeless students we have in our state, that role is often stretched so thin. I know in Sacramento, I was just talking to someone who does that job in the San Juan Unified School District, and she said she had 1,800 students on her personal caseload. 1,800 students. Yeah, and so it's really hard to do that. You're going to be stretched pretty thin. Yeah, Paul?
And then I would just say, too, in other districts, the homeless youth liaison may wear multiple hats.
Absolutely.
Not just the homeless liaison coordinator. So they may have multiple job duties. So they can't spend all of their time with the homeless students.
Right, yeah. So they could also be in charge of like the foster students. They could also be in charge of curriculum development. They could also be the vice principal. All kinds of things. So it can make it really hard to do that job. I know some national research said that most homeless education liaisons on average only had about 2 hours a week to do that job. I know a lot of amazing people across the state of California that are doing it really well. But again, it's one of those things that's pretty underfunded, especially for the size of the problem we have, particularly in the state of California. So the other research that we're doing right now is to look at college campuses, look at the UCs, CSUs, and community colleges, and see what campus supports are available for homeless students, so that we can talk a little more definitively about where these gaps are. So we're partnering with a student from UC Davis who's been doing some of that research. Probably not to the surprise of anybody in this room, but the UC system is it has more robust campus supports available. So a homeless student may be better served in an area that has more support. When you compare it with like the community colleges, which is going to have less support, sometimes, we were looking at mental health treatment, childcare, transportation, things like that, things that could really support student success. So these are kind of factors for students to consider in deciding college. So the other thing we asked the homeless education liaisons, what was the top housing barrier that you see for homeless college students? Any thoughts about that? What are the barriers to housing? Why are we seeing homelessness? Cost. Yeah, totally, cost. I think also no surprise to anybody in this room, California really does have a housing affordability crisis. I think that, as our state rebounds after the recession, we're seeing that things are getting better for some communities, but not for all communities, and that there are a lot of folks who are left behind. I was just at a PPA, Public Policy Institute of California event this afternoon about income inequality, and they talked about how income inequality really increased during the recession, and it has not made up since. So it hasn't gotten any better. That disparity that occurred during the recession persists even as the economy rebounds. So what we see in a lot of communities, especially in a lot of our urban communities, we see a lot of gentrification. We see the displacement of low-income folks, communities of color, people living in poverty. They're no longer able to live within their communities. And not a lot of affordable housing that's close to college campuses. Another thing that's sort of interesting for this community is that college students are ineligible for subsidized or affordable housing by virtue of the fact that they're college students. It's also really difficult, or in many cases they're ineligible for SNAP, also known as food stamps, or CalFresh here in California, so food assistance, nutritional assistance. So even though a lot of folks feel like college students must be doing okay, right? This is actually a really vulnerable time in the lives of young people, this sort of this transition to adulthood range. And for college students, I think that folks are really concerned or skeptical about this just being sort of like a temporary time of chosen low-income status in favor of education, and of course there's a family that's supporting you. But for many young people, that's not the case, and we know that. So some of this makes it a little bit harder. And so lastly, I'll just say, again, that, there have been some good bills that have passed in California recently around this issue. We're going to try to work to make sure that these bills are being implemented, right, because legislation is only good if it's actually doing something. So just one quick example, last year, a bill, AB 1228, passed. That created a priority for homeless students for on-campus housing. That was something that already exists for foster students, and so it sort of extended it to homeless students as well to make sure that the housing is available, is really going to folks who really, really need it, all other things considered. Yeah, and then it also requires schools, CSUs, UCs, CSU, to create a plan for housing homeless students during breaks. So this is the case like for foster students or international students, sometimes athletes. They may not have a place to go back to during campus breaks or during summer break or winter break. And so, if there's a dorm room, so what's their policy for international students? Is there a way to make sure that homeless students and foster students can also benefit because they may not be able to just go home back to their room, things like that. Sort of assumptions that we make when, policies created by folks with privilege, right? We might not even be thinking about that, but that's why it's so important to have folks in the Capitol kind of talking about this community in particular and their needs in particular. All right, so I want to transition a little bit to the issue that I was talking about briefly earlier, the criminalization of homelessness. Although I guess to close that college conversation, I wanted to say, the California Homeless Youth Project is pretty steeped in this world of homelessness, but if any of you all have connections to folks within community colleges, UCs, CSUs, please feel free to do an email introduction to me or come up afterwards, let me know. That's where I'm kind of looking to continue to build some relationships. So that would be super helpful. Any other last questions on that? Any of the stuff that I just talked about? Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess could you describe the broader coalition work? So a lot of times you see housing advocates or even housing transportation advocates, this complete community. And I'm curious of the carve out that we're talking about is youth. And so I'm wondering, are there even the LGBT youth carve out? I've seen from the nonprofit arena there's pushback on creating that. So I'm just wondering if a successful coalition model that takes this into account.
I'm trying to make sure I understand your question too. So you're thinking about has there been pushback in terms of coordinating a group of stakeholders, particularly around the needs of homeless college students?
Yeah, well, I guess especially around housing funding.
Housing
So
funding.
then it's raising the funds for housing.
Yeah.
And the fight begins.
Yeah, that can be kind of difficult and kind of controversial because like I was saying too, there are many different housing models, there are many different communities, different things work for different populations. And so I think, in order to get cohesion around that subject, relationships are so critical. It's something that, we try to do a lot is just sort of see where do we have common ground and try to, there are some folks that we're going to have common ground on certain issues related to housing or certain issues related to homelessness, but we won't on others. And I think it's still important to work with each other, where we can, when we can, even if we disagree ideologically in other areas. I'm curious too for folks from CCY, do you want to add anything to that question?
Part of what I would say is, part of our barrier is just raising the awareness about homeless youth. Most people have no idea that California has about 30% of the homeless youth in the country in our state alone. Yet our state invests $1 million, which is nothing for homeless youth, nothing. So, and many people have a perception that homeless youth choose to be homeless. That it's their choice to be out on the street. So there's a lot of perceptions that we're still working to educate people about. And the fact that homeless youth are invisible, often invisible in our communities. And even in the community colleges, systems and stuff, you don't know that they're homeless. You don't know what their needs are. So it's an education battle as much as it is anything. It's a good one because it's a bipartisan issue. Republicans, Democrats, everybody cares about it. But it's more of an education issue of getting everybody to realize the extent of the problem.
Thanks. Yeah.
So as a layperson, let's say it's homeless, where would I get information on how to be a positive influence maybe? Even if it's at the K-12 level?
Yeah.
Is there a listing or?
I think let's see. Your question may be answered at some point throughout the course of the talk. I hope that this really does stimulate and sort of generate thoughts among all of you about how, to be compassionate community members, and then if you're working professionally, hopefully it also helps you to think about, what are ways within your organization that you can also deepen a commitment to young people experiencing homelessness. So, yeah, I would love to crowdsource an answer to that question, but maybe we'll do that kind of more towards the end if that's okay with you. Cool, thank you. All right. So, California has the largest number of homeless youth and young adults in the United States. And these youth are more likely to be unsheltered than in almost any other state. We have the second highest rate of unsheltered homeless youth in the country. And so this is sort of unsurprising considering the fact that 2/3 of California's counties have no program specifically for homeless youth. That's based on some research we did back in 2010. So things could be a little bit different, but we know that there hasn't been significant new investment at the state or federal level, or in most cases within the communities, so it's unlikely that's changed too much. But yeah, 2/3 of California's 58 counties don't have a shelter. They don't have transitional housing. They don't have permanent supportive housing for homeless youth. And so when we ask ourselves about, when we see young people who are homeless in the streets, I think, going back to some of what Paul said, there's a lot of mythology out there around this is their choice and they want to live off the grid and, they could just go back home if they wanted to, if they just mowed the lawn on Saturday, this kind of stuff, which is like real pie in the sky sort of thinking about, how young people are ending up homeless. So, a lot of what we actually know really challenges that, like the data out there about what's available. And so I'm kind of focusing a little bit on this community of unsheltered homeless youth for a moment because it sort of ties into this issue of the criminalization of homelessness. So, real quick, has anybody here today had to sit, stand, sleep, by a show of hands, just at any point today? Most of you, probably all of you. Yeah, right, I know, a silly question, but I only say it because if you don't have a home with which to do those behaviors, those intrinsically human behaviors, it can be illegal in many cases. So sometimes they're referred to as anti-camping, anti-loitering, sit-lie laws we hear about in the Bay Area. So these are things, like I said, we do as housed folks. I'm just sort of making the assumption that we do every day. But if you don't have a program, if you don't have a place to be, if you don't have a home, and you're in public space engaging in these behaviors, folks can call the cops. And in most cases, in most communities across the country, but particularly in California, there are laws that tend to prohibit the rights and movement of people experiencing homelessness. So this is a really big challenge. And I think that this is sort of what folks, researchers, advocates, others refer to as the criminalization of homelessness. Sort of these suite of laws that tend to target people in particular based on housing and economic status. So even though it may not say homeless people are not allowed to do this, who is going to be most likely to be sleeping outside, right? It's not just like urban campers that are, looking to spend time in the park. These are people who have no options. We know that in no community across our state or across the country is there enough housing to meet the need. There's not enough shelter to meet the need. There's not enough transitional housing. There's not enough permanent supportive housing. And so, when I guess recently the Department of Justice sort of filed a brief saying that it's cruel and unusual to punish people for sleeping outside when they have no other options. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And what we see is that the recidivism rate for breaking these laws is incredibly high because a criminal sanction for human behavior is not a disincentive because you still need to engage in that behavior. So, more simply said, if you get a ticket for sleeping outside one night, and you might get arrested, you might go to jail, or you might just get a ticket. Hard to say. There's a lot of flexibility with how these laws are issued or enforced. But the next night, you're really likely to be sleeping outside again if you still don't have a home. And you can't necessarily make a different choice because you probably don't have a different choice. That's probably why you're at where you're at. And it's not, necessarily because of bad choices this person has made. I would argue that, we need to turn the lens back on us and say it's because of bad choices we're making as a community not to invest in just the most basic needs of our neighbors, our citizens, our country, our state. And I think that some of these laws have sort of come about because we do see an increase of street homelessness in many communities across the state. I know that Los Angeles just released their data from their most recent point in time count. They had, I think, like a 5% increase in people experiencing homelessness. They're already the community most impacted of any across the country. So that was a huge, I think, blow to a lot of people that are really doing great work in LA. But when we see this visible homeless population, the folks that are unsheltered living outside, it makes people feel uncomfortable. And I would sort of argue that it makes people feel uncomfortable because they're confronted with their own privilege. They're confronted with this concept of economic inequality, and a lot of times people don't want to see that. They don't want to think about that. And it's easier to rationalize why a person is experiencing homelessness or to demonize a community that is experiencing homelessness than to think more critically about, what are the cracks in the system that is causing this national phenomenon. It's not an individual problem, it's a national crisis. And we know that, the federal government has disinvested in affordable housing for decades, and that has sort of created multiple waves of homelessness, which I would love to get into history of, but we do not have the time to go so deeply into. But one of the things that I like to say is that the problem with homelessness is not us having to see it, it's people having to live it. That the best thing that we can do when we see a homeless person is not pick up the phone and call the cops, because law enforcement is typically not a successful conduit to housing. Homeless service providers are, street outreach workers are. They tend to be much more knowledgeable about the services available in the community and much more equipped to address the health and mental health needs of people on the streets. So sometimes we hear, again, sort of mythology about, oh, this person refuses services or is refusing shelter. But they may be refusing it from a law enforcement officer who might be coercive, like, there's a ticket for sleeping out, like, you're gonna get a ticket if you don't go to the shelter tonight, right? And that sort of, it's not the relationship and rapport building you would want to have with a community that has been kind of largely disenfranchised from mainstream society, right? You want to have somebody who is trained in like trauma-informed care, because we know many people on the streets have experienced trauma. They might be triggered, by law enforcement officers, or sometimes, we heard in focus groups of young people that they felt like their rights were taken advantage of more because they're young people, and that sometimes officers would put their hands on them without asking them to do something differently. And that kind of thing, for somebody who's experienced physical abuse or sexual trauma, can be hugely triggering. It can cause a mental health crisis. And then now you have a conflict between a person experiencing homelessness and a law enforcement officer. That situation is much more likely to escalate because it's a dynamic that's sort of like built around, power and authority. And that's not going to be the most comfortable way to approach somebody who has been disconnected from sort of mainstream like housing, employment, education, things like that. So if you have, a social worker who's trained in trauma-informed care who can kind of talk to this person about, what are your needs? Can we get you into shelter? Oh, you have a dog? Okay, let me see what shelter, accepts dogs. These are some of the things. Or, oh, it's you and your partner? And some people might make a choice to stay outside because there's no room at like the family shelter, or their partner, who is their family, their survival on the streets, can't stay, and so they don't want to go into the shelter. So it gets kind of complicated, and I think that probably one of the things that we can all do is just assume that people are doing the best they can with what they have, and that their choices are not malicious, right? Like, people are not like maliciously experiencing homelessness to upset us. They are, kind of swept into cracks created by a system that is not intended to serve them, that is not invested in serving them historically. Yeah, I feel like, we're sort of doing a better job as a state to increase momentum on this issue. There's been a lot of talk about homelessness within the Capitol this year and in recent years. And, we're super excited to see that. I think this is something that hasn't gotten the bandwidth it deserves for what a big problem it is in our state. So that's really positive movement. Let's see. When we interviewed over 200 homeless youth across the state of California, 72% said they had interacted with police at some point in the last month, but not one young person said they ever turned to police for help when they needed it. And so that's also some of the problem with these laws. If they are creating kind of like a negative relationship contact with a community that's supposed to protect and serve them, then they're less likely to reach out for help when they need it. And we know that homeless youth are more often the victims rather than the perpetrators of crime. They are, they experience so much victimization in the streets. Yeah, physical, sexual assault, harassment, robbery, theft, things like this. We want police to be safe people that they can turn to for help when they need it. So, and just so you don't feel like this is like my wacky, radical, harebrained idea that this is, not the right way to address this issue, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is made up of 19 federal agencies, have all come together to say that criminalizing homelessness is an ineffective approach. They've called it a high-cost, low-yield strategy. So it's costly, it's ineffective, it doesn't do anything to reduce homelessness or disincentivize people from being homeless. And so anytime you have 19 federal agencies to come together to sign off on a statement, it really does mean something because it's so hard, it's so bureaucratic to get those kinds of approval processes. And so just sort of as a country, at the federal level, we're sort of saying this is inappropriate. And so what we need to do is kind of do a better job of educating folks at the community level where folks are really faced with this question of how to respond to homelessness and say that, law enforcement-based strategy is not going to be the most effective, that really what's most effective is investing in service providers that are trained to deal with people experiencing homelessness. That makes sense? Any questions about this or other thoughts? I know it's kind of controversial subject matter. Cool. Okay, we are chugging right along. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about briefly is the idea of host homes. And I wanted to share a little bit of a story. So last August, I was hanging out with one of my friends, and she's a street outreach worker. And we were at my house, we were sort of lamenting the long wait lists that homeless youth have to endure in order to get emergency or transitional housing. So in Sacramento, a homeless youth, age 18 to 24, is going to have to wait 6 to 9 months to get transitional housing. And if you've bounced on your last couch or you're in a precarious situation, you have nowhere else to turn to, you've come to WIND, which is a program here in Sacramento, you're going to have to wait. There's about 100 people on this waiting list. So when we juxtapose that information with these laws that make it illegal to sleep outside, when we know that by virtue of our system, they will have to sleep outside or engage in survival sex to have a place to stay, things like this, it, again, really doesn't make a lot of sense. So we were sort of complaining about that, and I kind of joked that, I often wonder if I could be doing more with my living room. And, I live in a one-bedroom apartment, but it's pretty sizable, and I have double doors that close, and we were just talking about, gosh, we need a grassroots response. And it kind of planted a seed of an idea in my head that was much more legitimate around how can I, as a community member, sort of take personal responsibility for a crisis we are all culpable in. And so I went to the drop-in center, and I met Timon. And Timon is a 20-year-old young man. He was sleeping on the steps of City Hall or in Discovery Park, and because he had no place to stay. He had come here from Stockton, escaped gang life, didn't have any support, and was sleeping on the streets. And so when I went to the drop-in center, it was to record some of the reactions of youth to that Department of Justice statement saying that it's cruel and unusual to punish people for sleeping outside when they have no other options. Because the youth of the drop-in center, who are often literally homeless, like like living outside on the streets are really passionate about this issue. And so I wanted to see, what do you think about that? Wow, we're hearing something from the federal government. What do you think? So I interviewed Timon, and he was really excited about the subject matter as someone who was sleeping outside, also as a young man of color. He'd been asked to move. He'd been given citations, and he cared a lot about that issue. And so we just started talking, getting to know each other, and he was telling me about his aspirations to go to college. And I said, if you ever need any help with that, let me know. And he responded, and if you ever need any help with anything, let me know. I was like, cool. And we just kind of instantly had a connection. We had a good vibe. And over the course of several weeks, going back there to do other videos and just for other kind of like community events, I kept kind of getting to know him and having conversation with him. During that same time, unbeknownst to Timon, I was planting seeds to my partner back at my house saying, hey, there's just like this host home idea, and also I met this young guy who's a total sweetheart, and what would you think about us opening up our place for a limited time to a young man who's experiencing homelessness here in our community? And at first, he was skeptical. He didn't know this young person. He didn't know what it was like to be homeless as a teenager like I did, or what it was like to be a homeless college student like I did, or to have to rely on a community outside of your family to meet your most basic needs like I did. And so it wasn't as familiar to him as it was to me, and sort of natural to him as it was to me. But I kept talking with him about it, and eventually I sort of heard the magic words, which were like, I support you no matter what. And I was like, cool. So we ended up inviting Timon to kind of stay with us for a night. And this was after he passed his GED. We had him over for pizza, had a little celebration, and it was like, hey, do you want to just like crash here tonight? Just to see how it would work and how it would feel for all of us. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And he ended up living with us for about 4 months. And during that time, really stabilizing a lot of his health, his mental health, and also building social capital. Just like I live in Midtown, he was able to make friends. He was out at community establishments. And he built enough social capital to get a job and also to find another place to live. And that was my big hope, was that he would either make a lateral move or an upward move, but I really did not want him to go back to living on the streets. When he told me he wanted to trade the clothes in his backpack for school books so that he could go to college, I was like, I do not want him back on the streets. And so it was tough work. There were so many kind of like complicated, interwoven issues, but he was connected to an organization that serves homeless youth here in Sacramento. He had a youth advocate that was able to do that kind of case management type of work to help him with like educational, medical, legal issues. And then I was able to just like be, a friend and a mentor, a positive person. I didn't have to have like my social work hat on or my like California Homeless Youth Project hat on. I got to just know this young man as a young man and hang out, and also helped make sure his basic needs were met. So it was like, help yourself to anything in the kitchen. Please feel free to cook. I encourage you, actually. And that kind of thing is so critical, too, because if somebody's transitioning to adulthood and they don't have a place to live, they're not really learning those critical skills about, like, cooking or cleaning. And so, I folded him into, like, chores around the house. Weekly, we would cook dinner. We would kind of rotate who was like the head chef and who was the sous chef. So someone got to like decide the meal at night, and the other person would be the support person. So we did like family meetings, and so with this sort of like model of host homes, that was like very grassroots. There's not a host home program. I think there actually is a host home program in Sacramento. It's called Safe Families. I'm not very familiar with them. And there are a couple across the state. I know there's one in San Luis Obispo. There are some folks across the country that are doing great work, particularly in Minneapolis, and a lot of rural communities. So when I mentioned that statistic earlier about 2/3 of California's counties having no program specifically for homeless youth, a lot of people are sort of coming up with grassroots ways to meet this need, like a stopgap measure that is, cost effective, it's humane. Just like we see in the foster care system, we're trending away from like congregate care, institutionalized settings, wanting to like keep young people in homes, realizing that's the most developmentally appropriate way to go. And And we think that there should be those options for homeless youth too. And not everybody's going to want to take advantage of this. This is just for like one, this could help to serve one subset of the community. And so, for that reason, I think it's pretty exciting. And so this could be for young people who are missed by the child welfare system, or who have opted out, who are ineligible, or maybe too old for it. There's a lot of different options. And there are, some considerations too, like, you would want to have like training and support for anybody who's taking on this role. I know that I really needed support, not only from WIN, but from my community, from my partner. And then you would also want to maybe like have like a background check. But, so like in the foster care system, you could have had a felony marijuana possession 30 years ago that could make you ineligible. Things that could, really keep you from being like a loving home to a young person that don't really like hold a lot of weight, and so in some of these more like grassroots organizations, they can decide like, well, what really matters, what for the safety of the young person, and kind of like make more flexible decisions as a result. So not necessarily like a state program, but I think this is something that kind of works best when it's sort of from the ground up at the community level. One option. There's definitely more to say about that, but I do want to make sure, because we only have a couple minutes left, I do want to do the final activity with y'all before we go. So do folks have that postcard or index card? No? Okay, it's on the table right behind you. This little index card is next to the packets. And this will just take about 5 minutes. It'll be really quick, but I think it's kind of a fun way to close out. Cool. Thank you all so much. So real quick, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with, what's your big, bold idea for ending youth homelessness in California? Doesn't have to be something that's actually actionable at the Capitol. You can think as bold as you want to. But if you had your way, if you had your dream, your big dream, what would you see? What do you think should be done to end youth homelessness in California? No right or wrong answers, and it's totally anonymous. You're not going to have to read it out loud. You don't have to put your name on it. Yeah, everything's welcome. So just one idea. Come up with one idea. And what we're going to do is crowdsource a policy solution. Yeah, it could be a cultural shift or a political shift. So we'll take just maybe another 30 seconds or so, folks wrap up. And then when I say go, what we're gonna do is you're just gonna pass it to somebody. It can be a totally random person, and then that person is gonna rank it on a scale of 1 to 5. So 5 being like, this is an awesome idea. 1 being like, not for me. So no judgment here, but that's going to be the scale. And we're going to do that a couple of times. But so wait just until I say go each time. I'll say switch, okay? So it looks like folks are ready. So switch. Give it a ranking, 1 to 5. Yeah, you just write it on there. And don't put like 12 because you love the idea. Just give it a rank from 1 to 5. he needs one. Greg? You switch with him? Oh, okay, you got it. Cool.
Tell me what the numbers be again, 5.
So 5 the best and 1 not for me. 5, that's the best idea. Cool, okay. We're gonna do it again. All right, everybody, switch. Scale of 1 to 5. So take a second to read it, and then if you can, look up when you're done. All right, so we're going to the third round. We're going to do 5 total. You guys ready? Switch. So at the end, there's going to be 5 numbers. Shouldn't be more than 5 numbers. All right, seeing folks look up. Switch. So when you get your card, it should have 4 numbers on it now. Or once you put your number on. Getting a feel for what people are thinking in the room. All right, so very last round. As soon as you're ready, go ahead and switch. Last round. So now when you get this card, give it the final number, scale of 1 to 5, and then total the numbers. So you're going to tally up the total score. It's going to be out of 25. If for some reason it's over 25, you guys have done it wrong. Okay. And as soon as you total up the numbers, raise your hand if you're holding a card that has a score of 25. Is anybody holding a card with a score of 25? 27. Oh, we did? 5? Some people may have gotten, yeah, overzealous. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so then I'm going to assume that's out of 30 and then not the highest score. So, anybody holding one with 25? No. Okay, how about 24? You have one? Okay, you want to read yours out loud?
The Centers for Medicare Medicaid Services in Baltimore recently allowed Medicaid spending for housing. DHHS in California submitted $5 million in its 2020 Section 3032
No.
waiver for housing. Study data show cost effectiveness and ask for $200 million in 2019.
Okay. So that was so specific. Great, great. That, I guess, is the most popular idea to come out of this room. How about anybody holding one with a 23? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, you right here. Do you want to go ahead?
Or to host homes under models similar to child welfare system.
Okay, so kind of have like a parallel system, child welfare, but host homes. Popular idea. Carly?
Better transitions out of foster care. Just because someone ages out doesn't mean they are ready to be on their own. And being a young adult is difficult enough with support.
Yeah, better transitions out of foster care. Absolutely. Paul, you've got one?
Pair youth with retired individuals, substitute grandmas and granddads.
Oh, these are great ideas.
Stability and assistance from those in need.
Yeah, so some intergenerational support. So if young people need the support, elderly folks need the companionship, put these people together. Great. Okay, so those are some of the most important or like the best, the favorite ideas to come out of the room. So great job, you all. I would love it if you just like pass them to the center and up or just hand them to me, whatever works.